Okay, who here never used hand planes? You never used a hand plane? You never used a hand plane? Okay.
Long time.
Okay, there's a lot of different types of planes. We're going to just basically talk about joining planes, but we're going to talk about sharpening. And I figured since my last episode, I'm not actually going to sharpen something because we might require a tourniquet and stitches and stuff. There are a number of ways to sharpen tools, and I'm going to talk about sharpening first. Who here has a Tormex system or the Grizzly Tormex system? Okay. For those of you that don't know what we're talking about, it's a little machine that has a nice whetstone. It runs in a water bath, and then it also has a strop wheel. Now, if you're going to sharpen something, and if you're going to use a hand plane, if your iron doesn't shave, you just got a pretty piece of metal. The key to making any plane work or any chisel work is how you grind your angles. I use generally a 60-degree angle, which for an eyeball period, if this is your chisel or your iron, this should be double the thickness. That will give you an eyeball of about what 60 degrees are. Now, you often think the sharper the angle, the better it's going to cut, and that's true to some woods, but some woods you might want to go with a little harder angle, and that is something that you kind of got to play with. Now, I have a shooting board here. And if you have a good, sharp plane, there's something magical about the sound of the plane. I had mine turned down. Anybody here does not know how to adjust a plane? Okay. They're really quite complex, but they're beautiful in their simplicity. There's a little mechanism here. Here, pass that around, even though it's missing. I want you to look at the different parts. Okay? And don't be afraid to take it apart. I mean, really look at it. You have a lock. You have a chip breaker, an iron. I think they call this a frog. This thing here will actually turn your blade to square it up. And be careful, it's reasonably sharp. And rusty, if you don't have a tetanus shot, try not to bleed too hard. How much you want to cut's you don't want to overcut a plane, you don't want to undercut. So when you get a good plane, and I'm actually going to overcut a little bit, you can hear it grabbing and picking. Hear that? But when you finally hit the flat spot, now you can feel these chips. They're really heavy.
Did you use words overcut and undercut? Did you use the words overcut and undercut?
Well, by overcut, yeah.
I don't know what they mean.
Okay, overcutting means you're taking too much wood. Undercut means you're not taking enough.
Thank you.
So when you run a plane over here, and you look at the light, there you go. Look really close, and you're going to see some chips on the edge. All right? That's telling you that you're overcutting, and instead of cutting the wood, it's actually more or less splitting it. So you want to shear. Now the reason why I'm doing this first is this is the end, we're working backwards. I want to show you how it works, and then I'm going to show you how to get it there. Now I'm going to adjust the plane so I don't have kindle. And never put your plane down. And here's something else I want to do. I'm going to set this up so it's cattywampus. All right. Can you see how the plane is a little cattywampus?
Yeah, cattywampus, it's a technical term.
Yeah, cattywampus.
Industry term.
So, can you see the iron is not parallel to the sole? You see that? That's what this adjustment does. So when I turn this is in the slot there on the blade and the chip maker. So now you can see, oops, it's adjusted straight. Okay, so you can adjust the angle of your your iron. What can happen if you aren't square and parallel on this shooting board, this is an angled shooting board, and if you're at an angle, as you're cutting, you aren't cutting in a plane, you're actually starting here, and as it goes up the blade, it's taking more off. Now I can adjust this, and I'm going to take this down to where I would like it. Now, if you've never done this before, you can use something real simple like tape, even aluminum foil. Laying it down and just slowly working it down till you see that there's no light, and that will help you get that reasonably parallel. And this is just, grab yourself a beer, go out to the shop and play with it. Because that's the secret to this. The more you play with it, the more you actually use it, the better you're going to become, because a plane will either be a great tool or a boat anchor. Now, you hear the sound of it's different? And it doesn't take a lot. Now, I'm about maybe only 30% less on the last curve. I missed a spot. Yeah. And that does not take a lot to shear. Somebody want to try to see what it feels like? No participation?
I'll do it.
Come on. All right, there we go. Now, what I want to show you, when you hold this up to the light, you see how that's nice and burnished? And there it is. Now, this has to stop. And then you hold that to there, and just pull it back, and gently give it a push.
You're just holding it here?
It doesn't matter where you hold it. You feel how easy that is?
Floor cover with
And you can see I got a curl from one end to the other. I think those are neat. Now is that burnished part out in the middle? Just about. Now see how nice and shiny that is? Pass that one around. Now a plane is designed to be square and true. After all, that's its job. Now there's a couple of planes going around here, and they're in pretty bad disrepair. To true them up, or to clean them up. This one here looked very much like that big ugly one when I first got it. Who here has a granite plate? Okay. Who here has a table saw? All right. Table saws are generally the flattest thing you have in your shop if you don't have a granite plate. I generally use like a 320 grit paper. I put that on my granite plate, and then you just gently rub this back. Don't push. Let it do its weight. And it will take a while, but you'll get all of that black off, and you'll see you get a nice clean surface. Same way on the sole. When you look at that, you can see a nice reflection. You know you're good. Because there's nothing worse than a warped sole. The plane will never work. So if I'm going to pass this around, just take a good look at it. Remember, it is sharp. That plane, I think this is about it's a Bailey, so it was before Stanley, somewhere pre-1908. And this one was even earlier. The old wood planes are also pretty good. And these are often easy found at flea markets, yard sales.
But you're not stopping at 320.
Yeah, that's basically a 320.
320 is the finest grit when
Yeah,
you're cleaning these up?
That's a good cleanup, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Most of them are actually pretty good. You're just cleaning a lot of gunk off. It's amazing the amount of corrosion that can be in an old plane. That plane there, is that a Bailey or Stanley?
Well, this one says Stanley Bedrock on it.
Okay, so that's, back in the 1900s, 1919, 1920.
And what models should we look for? I saw one said number 6. This is
Okay.
608. What's
The different, like, when we talk about planes, they're going to be anywhere from an itty-bitty Philister plane to the joiner planes. To me, a joiner plane is probably 6 or bigger. 6, I think the clean one is a 7. I think is that one an 8?
the longest one says 608.
Yeah, that's actually, they turned that to a number 8. This is a 6, okay? And this is a number 8. So you can see the difference in length. They're also just a hair wider. So these were used for joining work, to join boards together. Something smaller like a 4 and a 5, they're more of a smoothing plane, sometimes called, then you have jack planes, but these are what you want for joining wood. So now that you see how a plane works, I'll explain how you get it to do that. The first thing you want to do is tear it all apart. And I just literally take these all apart. Believe it or not, water helps to get a lot of the crud off. And then I use mineral spirits and naphtha to get the other crud off. And at that point, then I'm going to go to the sandpaper. But I will use some kind of WD-40 or something to float with the sanding paper to keep the grit from building up. Otherwise, you're just 2-3 rubs and the sandpaper's blocked. So use some kind of a lifter, an oil lubricant with the sandpaper. If you want to use a stone, the problem with the stones, they're small. So you want something so you can rub that whole thing on nice and flat. You're going to do, and I generally do like 10 rubs on one side, then flip 10 rubs, and then another 10 rubs. Because if you just work one side then the other, unless you're a machinist and have a way with a dial indicator to make sure you don't take something out of true, that's probably the easiest way to do it. So once you get your body cleaned up, you just start taking it apart. A little carborundum stone, all your mating surfaces you want to clean up, and then put them back together. When you start putting them back together, if I took this out, there's a slot in here. So you can adjust the throat clearance from your plane. Too much of a throat and you are not going to control your curl. The object of the plane, when the wood's coming through, we'll draw a nice little piece of wood. Okay. You have a grain direction. You want to work, obviously you know you want to work with your grain. So you're going to cut in this direction. If you go the opposite way as you're lifting, you can peel and chatter your wood. The object that you want to do is you want to set your throat here, because this has a very wide throat. So if I'm going to plane an oak board for joining a board, this is what I want. If I'm going to go with something small, you're going to experiment with getting it forward. You just want that curl to be nice and even. If your curl isn't even, that's telling you that your plane needs some adjustment. So read your curls, because your curl can tell you more than the board. Now, when you go to sharpen, we talked about the Tormac. There are diamond plate stones, there's water stones, and there are oil carborundum stones. If you don't have a good stone, you aren't helping yourself. Norton is probably as good of a blade as you can get. Now, I could talk about sharpening systems, but if you go to YouTube, there's so many good systems out there. Anybody here ever hear of Scary Sharp? Okay, Scary Sharp for an entry level is terrific because all you need is a piece of glass and sandpaper. Okay, we had done a video on that, back in '7. So if you go out there and look for Todd Stock, and what was it? Did you list it as Blues Creek Open House?
I think so.
He gives a very good sharpening demonstration. The Tormex system is another good one, but all you got to do is go in there and take a look at that. There's umpteen guys that have different plane truing up. And I mean, just sit there and find the technique that works for you. But when you're going to actually start sharpening, this is your edge. And as you start coming down, this edge is going to develop what we call an angel hair. It's a real fine piece of metal, so as you're starting to cut this, it's almost like a thin piece of paper that's coming out there. You're always going to have to break that off. Now when you're done honing, I generally just take my iron and I'll run it on a piece of wood right like that. That'll take it off. Then you want to work, after you work this, then you just flat polish that part of the blade. If it doesn't shave, keep going. Now, when I use a water stone, I literally soak them in a bucket for about a half an hour. So as I'm setting my angle, that's saturating, and I keep it wet. The Japanese water stones are really, really good. Anybody here hear of Roy Underhill? Okay, Roy Underhill has a couple of good movies out on sharpening. He does it the old-fashioned way. He's done a million of them. He can do them by hand. There's the little bracket that you saw that you can put on. If you don't have a powered method of setting your angle, so this is your iron, here's your bevel. If this is not true, as you're going to cut, what's going to happen, that your plane's going to create an arc or a convex into the board, because it's sliding up and your angle's not right, it's going to take off more at one place than the other. So you have to be aware of that when you're doing your joining, when you're reading your board, that's going to tell you how to adjust your plane. So, when we're talking about sharpening again, you don't want to build up heat. All right? If you go to a power grinder, and you can do this, but you got to do a light touch, because if you see that blue mark, you've just tempered an area of your blade which can chip or it won't sharpen like the other side. Because once you change the taper in the temper in the steel, you're going to really throw the whole piece of metal out. If you're building houses, it's fine, but when we want to join guitars, we want to be very, very precise. Because when this comes back, you'll see how thin, I'm going to just keep working the plane back, how thin of a curl you can get. The Japanese, they have planing competitions to see how thin of a curl they can pull off of, what is it, like a 12-foot board. And the winner was like a half 1,000. You know, he's pulling a 12-inch wide, and he's just and you're just seeing this come off. It's to me, it's art. So, let's get into the details of sharpness. The first thing you want to do is make sure your angle is right. So there you can use something a little bit coarser. So if you're going to use the scary sharp system, you can probably use like a 220 grit just to get it close. Then as you start getting nearer the edge, you want to go with a finer and finer grit. And don't throw away your leather belt. You can take a leather belt and you can put polishing compound in there to strop the edge when you're done. And boy, I'll tell you, that makes a big difference. And it doesn't take a lot. You can make them nice and shiny and smooth, but always be cognizant that you are not putting a convex or a concave in here. Because if you do that, again, that's what can screw up your plane. I can't say enough for the wet stuff. Because the Tormex system, you actually lock your iron or chisel in there, and this will slide across your stone. So even if your stone is not perfect, it still work in the high spot, that you can get that nice and true. To work the back part, you're just going to take your iron. Hello, Megan. You're welcome to join. Thank you. Getting sharp edges out. Is there a doctor in the house? The top part is called your chip raker. The bottom part is called your iron. Now, I'm going to pass this around. It's reasonably dull, so, but you can just look at the edge and you can see how butchered up that is. So, as you're going to set your angle first, now some people also use what they call a secondary angle, where they will take this part and just add a hair of an angle on it. I've done them both ways. I don't know if it really makes a big difference, but you know when you have a good plane. There's a certain sound. With the chisel, I always put that secondary angle on, because if you're carving braces, you need that little step and I'm going to kind of over magnify this. So as you're cutting, you have a point that you can bring the chisel out of the wood. Because if you don't have that angle and you're carving your braces and you're shearing, sometimes you grab a grain and it will split. So this affords you a walkout angle so that you can take your board as you're cutting it and shaving the braces. It lets you do a nice scoop.
How do you put your micro bevel on completely at the end of the shortening?
I will do that when I'll make this bevel. When I'm all done, I'll come back and just put a secondary bevel
Just a
on.
micro bevel.
And that's just, that doesn't really take much. And this is experience. You just have to kind of do it a few times. Just, like I said, grab a beer and a board and have some fun. When you want to set the, when you're finally finishing to do the flat spot, you're going to take the iron and you're going to put the flat side down. And I do not lay it down there. I'll drag it back on you. Because if you go and hit it down, you can put an imperfection in your blade and just gently rub it and polish it. You're going to see how that will, when I get it back, I'll show you what I'm talking about. You want to keep everything, it's technologically, it's called a Euclidean edge, just one line of points. That's what you need. Now, when you're doing chisels, because chisels can come in all different widths, I really do like that little rolling attachment. I think you can find them at Grizzly for $14.
Veritas.
Yeah. Which one did you say you had, Glenn?
I have the work sharp. I have the.
Yeah, you
It's
have
the
a work sharp
thing,
system.
yeah.
You got to just do it. I used to be a machinist. I'd take them into work and run them on a surface grinder, but I don't have that luxury anymore. Who here has tried sharpening chisels and didn't have any luck? Okay. All right.
I mean, yeah, it's to a point, but you know, I could never get it sharp
Point.
as I want it. You know,
Okay, and you probably have 2 quarts of the stone.
I have. I'm using the diamond stones. I used water stones for a while, and I didn't like them. Now I'm using flat plate diamond. Fine and extra fine.
Well, I do like them because they're reasonably flat and you don't wear like carborundum stone. Because that's what you got to be careful of. When you're using a stone, if you keep working the same spot, next thing you know, you got a dip. You can true them back up, and I do that on my granite plate, and I'll use something like a 120 grit and an oil bath, and it takes a while, but the diamond stones will also help grind down a carborundum stone. And the way to know that you're good is if you can take a little straight edge. Machinist, everybody know what a machinist scale is? They're pretty true, so you can lay that on your stone this way, angle, and lengthwise, because if your stone is not flat, you're not going to get a flat plane. It just aren't going to happen. That's where the Scary Sharp system is pretty good, because a piece of glass is pretty flat. I think he used water with his. He used wet, dry sandpaper stuff that you can get at the hardware store. And I got to admit, it took him, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and he had a perfect edge. Not all steel is the same, all right? You can buy a really good plane with a real bad iron, and you're screwed. One thing that you can tell when you take a plane iron, and I know this sounds almost sacrilege, but if you bump it against a piece of metal and then look at the edge and you see you got dings in it, the temper in that steel is gone. All right. Now I can tell you how to retemper it, but that takes some experience. You can put it in the fire, heat it up, take a carborundum stone, run it across there, and you can see the different colors. You're going to see anywhere from your lighter color. Blue is your cooler color. Watch for the color of straw, and then you sink that in oil. Don't put it in water. Oil will cool it down, but it won't cool it down as fast. If you use water, water will cool it down, and it can crack, give you a micro crack. Okay? Yeah. Anybody got any questions up to now?
What's a good source for cutter irons, for good irons?
I know Veritas, you can still find new old stock Stanley. eBay is probably the best source because I often look there for the old plane parts and grab them. there used to be a website, I don't know if it's still up, it was called Blood and Gore. And it was about Stanley planes. The guy had a sense of humor. Veritas planes are extremely good steel. I mean, of course, they're $400 planes. So don't be surprised if you see a good plane iron go for 75 to 100 bucks. Because it does take a good piece of steel. If you know a machinist, probably D2, A2 or D2 steel would be a good one. You can make your own. That's because you can buy tool steel in specific sizes, and then you can regrind. If you know somebody with a mill, they can do your slotting for you. Or if you're really good with a drill press and a file, I've done that already. Okay?
John, so if we're going to use the rolling holder that maintains a steady angle for plane, iron, or a chisel, what angle do we want?
You want 60 degrees.
On all of it?
Pretty much on all of it. You can play with the angle for your own technique.
Okay.
The key on a plane isn't just the angle, it's also the opening of the throw.
Oh, sure.
Because as this is working, I think I started talking about that sidetrack. As the iron's coming in here, all right? As the iron's coming in there, if you just took a chisel and started cutting it, you have no control. The chisel just wants to really go. So if you have that lock-in angle here, you can control the depth. With the plane, you have the sole controlling that. All right?
Some of the chisels I bought, they come with about a 25 degree angle.
Yeah.
25 is what I've been experiencing.
That's great. 25 would be
Well, that's what they
about
come
like
with.
that.
I mean, that's what matches. When you take a new chisel, like a 2 cherries or something, and put it on there, it's going to match take the Veritas.
No, I think it's the opposite,
If you're
John.
talking about the other
It's the
angle.
70, yeah, so from that thing, it would be 75.
measure from
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
So there you'd be talking a 65 angle.
Oh,
Basically a 65.
what is it, 2?
It depends upon what reference they're taking the measurement from. Okay, so if he's going this way, it's going to be a supplementary angle. So if you have 90 degrees and you're doing 25, that would be about a 75 degree angle.
65.
Depending upon the 65.
You're right there.
I mathed really well. I did English good too. So yeah, that would be about a 65 degree angle.
So I'm just, from what I'm matching up with my.
Yeah. And I don't think 5 degrees one way or the other is going to make a big difference, but sometimes it will. So you want to experiment a little bit. And again, if you're going to put a little bit of a micro bevel, that's going to probably take you from a 65, or the 65 down to the
Do
70.
that completely at the last
Yeah.
part.
Yeah, and when I do the micro bevel, it's not very big. You just want just that it's there, because that affords you the walk-in. I'm kind of repeating myself.
So does anybody know on those clamps that roll back and forth, is it going to be 60 or 30? I mean, because we're talking,
Well,
it's got to add up to 90,
it would give
right?
you.
So
It would give you. Well, they're actually adjustable. You can take them when you put your iron or your chisel into the fixture.
Right.
How you set that up, because you can adjust how far down you go, and it has that roller. Is anybody here that don't know what we're talking about? The plane. Okay. What he's talking about, it's a little fixture, and it actually has rolls on the back. And you have this little roller here. There's a fixture here, and there's usually a thumb screw and a parallel that you can take it in there, and it will clamp your chisel. And you can set your angle some of them actually have little gauges that you can set up that will give you your angle, so that from this point to that point, that will tell you, say, 1.5 inches, you're at 60, 1.25 inches, a quarter.
It's
yeah.
insulated, it's marked.
Right. So that will hold the chisel here, so that as you're rolling it, you aren't wobbling it, you aren't rocking it, and it just takes that variability of your hand out. That little roller will just roll on your stone, and it doesn't take a lot. I mean, you've got it.
Yeah.
The hardest part you got to remember is keeping it square, because most of them will have most of those little fixtures, when you look inside, they have little steps like this. So when your chisel fits in here, you can go to the different steps, you can lock it and get it square.
Now, you have planes that have a different angle of the iron too.
Yes,
So for this iron, it's 60 degrees, but for some of those other ones, maybe that's what,
yeah, they have low angle planes.
so it might be the 20 or 30 degrees that the gentleman over there was talking about.
Well, I think
It's a
it was
different,
just,
it's a different angle though.
well, he was talking about Sweetheart cherry chisels.
Oh, okay.
So they're 25, they're just taking the angle from, I'm taking the angle at the point, they might be taking the angle off of the iron itself. So, but it's still gonna add up at the cutting edge, the proper angle. Because when you start getting into a blunter angle, you become more of a shear, what did they call it, scraper. It's more of a scraper used in lathe turning than it is in free chisel work. And like I said, there's a lot of good YouTube videos out there. So just what I'm trying to just get you to know that there's places where you can find the information that's going to be a lot more detailed than I can do in an
Right.
hour talk. But the key is to know that your iron temper is where it needs to be, because you can you buy chisels and you can buy the Sweethearts. I got a Stanley Sweetheart set. You think that they're sharp when you get them, and they reasonably are, but they aren't totally honed out. And by honing, that's when you're doing that final, really touch up with fine grits. So you don't want to see, if you see sanding marks or tool marks on your edge, that's not good. So you want to keep going to a finer grit till you see that those marks are pretty much gone. If you do it well, it's almost a polished look when you're done. You're going to see a little bit of grinding work here, but at the edge, that's where you want to see the grinding marks gone. Where's the good chisel?
John, can I ask a question about
Sure,
that?
yeah.
So when you're sharpening, where do you stop and you're ready to polish?
Yep.
What grit do you stop sanding or grinding or honing at and start polishing with your leather?
Okay, I'm at maybe 320. It depends on the temper of the iron, because the different irons, the different temper is going to require a different grit. Because not all grits are going to work with all steels. Generally, the harder the temper, the coarser you can use. And then you just work your way back through the grits. Now I have probably about 8 different stones. So I got drawers full of chisels. So I just keep going until I'm down to my last one, and then I spend a day. And when I sharpen, I always make sure that I can shave. So I wear shorts and I come back with a nice clean shaved right leg, and my wife's laughing like hell because I look like a gorilla from the knees down. But if it doesn't shave, you're screwed. Also, take a piece of paper, and if you take a piece of paper and you draw that across your blade, you'll find where you have a bad spot, because all of a sudden it just won't want to cut it. And if you have that, you need to do a little bit more work, because a good plane is just wonderful to work with. A bad plane is frustrating. That's why I think planes get a bad rap, and they aren't all the same. But the old ones, I love these old planes. You can find them flea markets. eBay's a good source, but you got to watch on eBay. Educate yourself, because you'll find stuff, they're marriages. And then you can be screwed, because you're getting parts that don't match. So learn to look. Like I told you, the blood and gut site, I think our blood and gore. Just, you type in whatever you want, subject to this plane. Type it in, and you're going to find there's 42 versions of this plane that they made through the years. So try to find what was done, because when you look at the planes, this is actually a Stanley part with a baler, but it does match. The big deal is something as simple as the knob. This knob, it was shaped different in 1906. In 1907, they changed the shape from this to a big ball. Look for that information so that when you are buying a used plane, you know you're getting matched parts. Now you brought up a good point. Some of them do have different angles here. Low angle, high angle, they were used for different types of work. This is perfectly adequate for joining tops and backs. The Amish hate figured wood, because planing figured wood, you're kind of screwed. So if you have something that's really, really figured, you're probably going to tear it out, and at that point you're probably going to need to use a high-speed router or a sanding technique. All right?
Usually, tops and backs, you usually use a plane like that to join them.
Yeah.
I got a spiral head joiner.
Joiner.
Yeah, it seems to do a pretty good job.
Yeah, I've gotten down, I actually use my table saw first, and then I take a secondary cut, just that I peel it, and then 2 or 3 pass with this. If I do need to make an adjustment, I do use sandpaper on a granite plate, that I can find it really, you can really get them perfect.
'Cause I don't have a lot of experience with planes.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, and if you don't, I mean, like I said, grab a beer and a board and just keep playing with it, because you'll actually find it's very difficult to get it perfect every time.
that's why I bought the spiral cutter head, because the 3-blade, on a joiner, you're trying to adjust them, and it's to try to get those lined up. With the spiral cutter head, it's all.
Yeah, if you don't have a dial indicator, yeah, because there's those of you who uses power joiners for joining. Okay, you know how much fun it is when you change your blade to get that in right, because you end up with the scallops, and it can drive you nuts. So those are
that's
nice
why-
heads.
Yeah, the spiral cutter head, there's no.
Yeah, they have.
experience.
Have you seen those spiral cutters? I mean, you got an insert, you take it out, turn it 90 degrees, you got 4 cuts in one. They do work pretty nice. They're worth their money.
That's usually what I use to hold it up to the light.
Yeah.
I've had some problems, but I think it might have been more with clamping pressure, maybe.
Yeah, that's the other thing with a power joiner, how hard you hold down if your tables aren't perfect. And sometimes with wood, when you take a little bit off, there is stresses in the wood. That little bit can give a little flex.
But I'm talking about just your pressure when
Yeah.
you're joining
Oh yeah,
the.
the pressure that you're using here, the object is try to do it as, let the weight of the cutter do it. Because right here, the throat and that iron is going to pull the plane down. So you don't have to help it. Let it do its job. Because that's, I think, where a lot of people get wrong. You start bearing down on it, and you can just exasperate the problem. So,
I'll open up a suggestion. Maybe some of you know about Highland Woodworking outside of Atlanta. I've had good success rebuilding old planes, buying the parts from them. They sell kits. I don't know where
Oh,
they
good.
get them from, but they sell kits to buy the various parts that you might be missing on an old plane. What's the name of it?
that's great, yeah.
What is it
Where's
called?
that?
Highland Woodworking? Yeah, it's just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. They have a nice shop if you ever get to it. I used to run a family in there. It's nice to visit.
When you have an old plane body like that, you're relying on the sides of the sole being at right angles
Correct,
to clean it up.
yeah.
Do you ever run into situations where they're not
On cheap planes.
on cheap ones?
Usually they say made in China. Yeah. Now I'm lucky. I'm an old machinist, so I can go to a surface grinder. A friend of mine has one. I can read through them.
Yeah.
But yeah, by a surface grinder, that's where you have a magnetic chuck that slides back and forth, and you can be very, very, very precise to true things up. But let's face it, few of you even know what a surface grinder is. The old hand wave works fairly well, but the old quality tools, it's awfully hard to clean them up and take them out of square. It really is. But the cheaper ones, or you find some that were probably put in a fire or very badly pitted, avoid them. Because they're nice to look at on the wall, but they're not good tools anymore. Okay, can I have that board back? Yes. Okay, now, did everybody get to see this, how the edge was burnished? Now this one here has a fuzzy spot in the middle. I made an adjustment on my plane. Now, if you join, you can do the two at one time. That way, if you are off square a little bit, the one side's complementary to the other. But to me, that's just, I can see how fine they are. So now that you got the first edge, then you can take it a little bit further and keep going down. And now you heard I was off. There's the high spot. And you got to read your chips. Take a little more. Because when you finally get it down very, very fine, I want to see how thin of a curl I can actually get. So you can keep getting finer, and that's the key. That's when you know your plane's working. And now, wow, now show that, you can see how much smoother that edge looks. When you look at the edge, it's almost like it's burnished. It'll be nice and shiny. It's not dead straight because I kind of wobbling on it. But you can you take a look at it up to the light and look at how the light is reflecting off the cutting surface.
I have an odd question. I have an old plane. First, well, I forget the make on it, but the depth adjustment is reversed. Clockwise retracts the plane.
Yep. Yeah, they use left-hand thread.
Yeah, I know.
It's the way they did it. I guess if, you use it often enough, you know you're going.
Yeah, I mean, I'm used to it, but it.
See, when you look at this thumb screw in here, okay, that captures on both sides. So you want to be aware of which way your iron is being pushed. So if you know that you're pushing it up, you want to take it down and just give it a little turn back so that the blade doesn't come back in. So you want it to ride on the proper side of that thumb screw.
Yeah, I was always taught it's like tuning. You want to go down and then tune up to it.
Yep. All right.
I have a question about the convex and
Yeah.
concave and how you if you get some of the chisels or even your other planes with a curve, sharpening curved blades, cutters.
If I'm going to do what for
Like just your little, some of them are flat, some
Yeah.
are
oh, you mean like the old hand planes, like the?
well, just even your little, like the,
Are you talking carbide?
just a little convex plane or something,
Oh.
You know,
Photograph.
or the chisel, like a two-carriage chisel that's,
They have
but it's
Yeah. they have those little dish cutters that you can get. If you're going to do
sharpening
yeah,
those.
what I'll do there is I generally put them down, and I've been very, very lucky. Remember when you went to school, it was called the law of tangents? Okay? You take a stone and you kind of do this. It is kind of swirly, but that's how you have to do it, or buy the radius. You can buy radius sharpening stones for them.
Yeah.
That's the best advice I can give you with them, because that's a skill.
Is there any way sharpening carbide?
Yes.
For say your binding cutters and things.
Okay, that's a good question. On the binding cutters, solid carbide, when you're looking at your cutter, they're either generally 2 or 3 flute cutters. So you have your shaft. Pardon me if my artistic ability isn't too good. But you're going to have your cutter. I want to make sure I get my hands right. All right. I'm going to make this a 3 flute. Don't sharpen this point. You rub your flat with your diamond cutter on the flat side of your cutter. That's what you do. Don't try to cut this edge. Just try to polish down on that edge. It doesn't take much. Now, carbide won't get as sharp as high-speed steel. You won't really get a razor's edge. You'll get a good sharp edge, but it's not going to be like a razor like it will with high-speed steel. But that's what you do. Run it on the flat, and I generally give them maybe every 5 or 6 guitars. They just clean them. When you see that they get gummed up, soak them in, just put them in WD-40 for a little while or naphtha. Clean them up and just give them a light touch. But make sure that you keep it flat. Don't try to sharpen it. Hold it flat and just rub it. And it'll last a long time.
That's something, you know.
Yeah, in order to actually sharpen carbide, you need diamond. You can't do anything with the carbide stuff. They'll just stick.
But in that process, you're actually reducing the diameter of the cutter slightly.
Microscopically, just by 1/1000 or 2. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you are. You're taking it back a little bit. But for doing binding work, then you just go a little bit deeper if you have to. But yeah, it'll last you for a little while. I mean, I get about 50, 60 guitars out of a set of cutters, and then we're done. I do sell the wood line cutters, and I think you can get also a Grizzly. They also sell a Daewoo set, a rabbit set, and theirs are very cheap. They're like $30. And then I have discrete cutter set up, so that way I can just grab a drawer and go. But you can get replacement cutters, and you are right. After a little while.
I got another question. A lot of times if I'm doing a herringbone or wide, I like to use wide wooden bindings usually.
Okay.
And I'll go to cut my herringbone, and it just seems like none of the small bearings are small enough.
What set do you have?
I got one from each from LMI and
Okay, that's when you can do what I call tweener adjustment. There is copper foil tape that they use for Tiffany style stained glass work. It's about maybe it's about a 1/1000.
Yeah.
You can use that for an adjustment, or put a piece of tape on the guitar with a bearing rod.
Yeah, that's what I did. I cut them like a smaller off of, a different just a router bit. But then I had to get it into where I wanted to get deep enough that I had everything was laying flat. I had to. It didn't seem like none of the small bearings was giving me enough room with the way I've been cutting with my homemade binding cutter.
That can be a pain. Sometimes Grizzly has 2 sets of rabbit cutters. They're fractional.
Yeah.
Okay, so they'll go like 1/16, an 8, 3/16. Because if you're going to do generally the herringbone, depending upon whose herringbone you use.
Yeah.
For me, it's a 230 thousandths cut with a binding and herringbone. The Martin stuff is a little wider, and I use that Grizzly set for that because it's fractional and it seems to work out. I don't know. You do a lot of wood binding.
The LMI bits and bearings are made by Whiteside, and if you call them directly, they'll make any bearing size that you want. So I got them made from 1/2 inch all the way to 1 inch in 10,000 increments.
You know what I mean?
And so I can cut anything, but you just call them directly.
Whiteside?
Yeah, and wood
Tell them
Well,
that.
I called LMI. I said, "Do you have a smaller binding?"
LMI won't do it.
they
They're
won't
getting
do
them as a set, and that's how they get their discount. But if you call the company that manufactures it directly,
Whiteside.
they'll make you have to figure out what size bearing you need.
And Grizzly also has a wide selection of bearings that they
What's
might
it called?
have.
Whiteside bearings?
It's Whiteside router bits.
Right.
Yeah, because I got the wood line bits, and I had them made that they were 10,000 increments from 1/4 inch out the flush.
The only issue I think is that the inner diameter of the bearing on the Grizzly is different than the LMI one.
Yeah.
Is it?
And the height of the post that the screw goes into is different. also.
Yeah, so how much are their bearings, do you know?
And I bought so many of them. I think they're going to charge you between $30 and $90 per bearing, depending on what size it is.
In that
And if they
case,
have to custom, they're sleeve bearings, so they're not actually, it's not like a real bearing. It's basically a sleeve, and then they custom make it to a certain size. But depending on what size diameter you want, it can be not expensive or expensive.
yeah, that's why if you
But
look,
if you're using it for a process and you're going to use it over and over and over again, it's hard to have the right size.
I got so frustrated with that. I used to like wider wooden binding and
Well,
take it.
The LMI ones, they go pretty consistently when you get close to 1 inch, but then there's a section where they like kind of jump.
Yeah.
And I used to get upset because when I was doing binding, if I needed just 5 thousandths more, I was now taping off the guitar and, basically making this huge,
Yeah.
stupid, jerry rig kind of
Yeah,
thing.
long-
So I finally just called the company and they're like, tell us what size you need. And I literally bought every size I could ever fathomably need,
Yeah.
so that if I'm, 3 in the morning trying to fix something, I have it.
Yeah.
So now I'm like a bearing hoarder.
Yeah.
I'm like you, being a past machinist, I used to go in and I could make my own. But take a look, before you go there, just take a look at Grizzly, because they do have a pile. If you know what your width is,
Yeah.
take a look. They might have one there that's, $35 for their set and $5 for the pair.
Yeah.
But he's right. I mean, if you're doing something very, very, very precise, I mean, take a look there.
Stumac also sells a set with bearings, and they're, I guess it's 1,000 increments.
10.
10,000.
10,000, but they're lacking a little bit for 45s. Because if I do the old style Martin 45, it's a tweener size. So you're kind of screwed. So I have Woodline. I actually got a set. I got them from Woodline. They work. But you're right. If you're dealing with something 2-3 thousandths, it can be frustrating. And I think there was a talk on OLF about using a scratch stock. Does anybody know what a scratch stock is? Okay, a scratch stock is basically a glorified scraper, and this was used in the old 17th century for, you didn't have routers, so they would cut a profile, and it was just basically a shaped scraper. I tried that, and it worked really good with the grain. Across the grain, it just shredded it. But yeah, I have LMI set, I have Stumac set. I'm really happy with the Woodline set. Like I said, there's different tapes that you can put on. You can tape the bearings. I'll tell you something else that sometimes works, depending upon what you need, is super glue. Paint some super glue on a bearing.
Would you mind maybe going through would you mind going through a basic procedure if you were to just do sharpening a plain blade on that, what is it?
Okay, if
scary sharp, even if it's just a simple glass
And then we'll get you next. Okay, on the Scary Sharp system, you are going to use a fixturing to hold your iron at a predetermined set. So you're going to start, depending on how bad your iron is, you're going to take a look. Is it all dinged up? Is it nice? That's going to tell you, start with the coarse grit, get it down close. Once you see that you're closing up on the angle, and one trick that you can do is if you take magic marker and put magic marker on the angle, as you start going down, you're going to see where the high spots are. There's also, it was called Dicom, it's a layout fluid. That tells you where you're cutting. But magic marker works really well in a pinch. Once you know that you have this whole angle flat and true, then you go to your next grit, and you keep going till this angle looks reasonably shiny. Then you take it on the flat, and like I told you, when you take your iron on the flat, let's say that this is your stone, don't go like this. Draw it back and keep it flat, because one thing you don't want to do is rock it. So you want to keep this flame plain flat. You want to clear off your angel hair, and then you strop it up with a little polishing compound on a piece of leather, and you will get them you will get them sharp.
How about the buffer? Are you using the buffer all the time? Is that too much?
You gotta be careful because it can build heat,
Yeah.
but there are different, are you talking a cloth buffer or a, cloth buffer probably won't hurt. Yeah. There's a buffing, an actual buffing wheel that we used in machinists, which remember the ink erasers we used to have as kids? It's basically that. It has it's a rubber with an abrasive in it, but a little bit of maybe 320 grit, lay it flat, lightly polish it. You can go up to 2,000. You can make them shiny, but just make sure they're true. I can't stress that enough. Make sure they are true.
He was saying he was having trouble getting them sharp. Of course, it's never happened to me, but I know with the buffers, you can easily round that edge.
Yes.
Okay, you've got a good sharp edge, and you try to buff it up, and it rounds that edge.
Yes. If you take a leather belt and just get like turtle wax polishing compound, smear some in there, rub it in with your hand, and just that's what the old razor guys did, because it doesn't take much.
That might be some of the problem because I'm just taking mine over my buffer.
Maybe you're taking too much.
Basic question. You've been talking about the joining. What about like cleaning through thickness? Is there any difference? Is you use it? Because I don't know. You use a different style of plane.
Yes.
Is there a different method of sharpening?
They act well. The sharpening method's going to be the same. The difference there is going to be the angle. Is going to usually you have what they call a jack plane and a smoothing plane.
A what plane?
A smoothing plane. Now, they do have in the old 17th and 18th century. They actually had a little bit of a scoop because you're kind of just hogging things down. But then when you get near the finishing, then you want to get a smoothing plane. Some of them have very low angles, and you can find those. Flea markets, yard sales, they're generally about a long. They're very similar to a jack plane. They're generally wider. And you want to put a stop so you can really go at it. Me, I have this machine called a belt sander. But yeah, you can be very, very precise with that. And then scrapers. Get a good scraper. Now, I use actually blued, I use 20,000 blued tempered steel. And then that's a good subject. Burnishing an edge for a scraper. Has anybody ever here tried that and failed? They are the easiest things to do.
That's what they are.
Okay? You get a fine mill file, put it in your vise, and just run it across. Get that nice and flat. Then you take something that's hardened, like a screwdriver. So you have this. Then you take the screwdriver and you just take it across your edge like that, and that will do this. It just rolls that edge right over. And with the tempered blued steel, I generally cup it, and then you can peel. It will give a real nice curl if you do it right. And that's not a hard skill to learn, and it's real easy if you don't trust a file. Just a regular carborundum, sharpen it, and then the screwdriver works very well. And I learned that trick as a meat cutter. We used that. That's how we cleaned our butcher blocks off in the old days.
So you roll the edge just from the file.
Yeah. No, you flatten it with the file,
Right.
which leaves a little bit of a burn.
Right.
Then you take a screwdriver and you just
Okay,
rub it across.
but you don't take that file and then run a stone over to kind of sharpen that edge more.
No, all you want to do is create a burn. And I'll tell you, it'll take you a few tries, but you'll learn pretty quick. And they will work very, very well. You can do fast work with the scraper, but it depends on the steel of the scraper. Blued, tempered, spring steel, you can buy that as shim stock. So you can get 50-inch piece, cut yourself shapes, and you can have a whole pile of scrapers really cheap. Now, was it Al Carruth that created that scraper?
Yeah.
I mean, he has a really dandy one. That's a big, heavy one, and that works very, very well too. But make my own with, I got a lot of tempered blue steel.
What thicknesses
Um,
of steel?
about a 20 thousandths, 15, 20 thousandths. If you can't cut it with the shear, you know, it cuts pretty easy with a good 6-inch shear. Any other questions? Remember, you got to keep your edge cool. I'm a big fan of wet grinding rather than dry grinding. Keep your stones true and just take your time. You know, it's a skill you have to learn. I can tell you how to do it, but you actually have to practice a few times, but you'll get it. And it's worth the effort to do it, because once you got the plane sharp, that'll last you a long time. As long as you don't lay it down on its side.
For the chisels, what are the two angles for a chisel?
I basically do the 60 with about a 5-degree relief cut, or relief angle. All right.
The machines work good, the Tormex and the Grizzly.
The Grizzly one is a lot cheaper than the Tormec.
Yeah,
The Tormec is fantastic. It really is. If you're going to do a lot of sharpening with Tormec, I've had my Grizzly for, oh God, maybe 10 years. But you know, when I sharpen, I just spend a day or two twice a year sharpening chisel.
You use that?
Yeah.
For wheel, wet wheel?
Yeah, I like that because it doesn't spin very fast. It's in water. And when you're done with the water stone, make sure you drop your water trough because you can ruin the stone. Waterlogging can ruin it. But it cools the edge. You don't change the temper. And that is probably the most important thing, because a high speed, you know, going to a bench grinder, once you see blue, you're kind of screwed. Yeah. And you can get very good at it. You really can.
What do you recommend for wet stones? Shapton?
Any name brand. I would avoid Harbor Freight. You know, yeah. You can figure you're going to pay.
No, they're a lot of money.
Yeah. I think when I bought mine, I paid $25-$30 a stone. So yeah, MSC, MasterCard, W.W. Granger, probably Rockford. What's the Lee Valley? You know, if you buy something from them, yeah, it's going to cost more, but there's a reason that it costs more. So I would highly recommend buying from a name supplier, because if you buy a cheap stone, you can ruin a good iron.
How often do you level the stones?
When they need it.
So you use your machinist ruler to check every once in a while? And
Yeah. One way to know that you're true is just if you work your plane and you look at it and you see daylight, then you're going to want to try to true that up. And again, you can just take something as simple as put an X pattern with magic marker on the stone and just work it down. But you have to do a lot of grinding to screw them up. The diamond sharpening stones are much better for staying flat than the carborundums and the water stones. But the water stones for honing, I would recommend them highly.
And the diamond stone flattens the water stone really nicely.
It does. It does. My father used to be a carpenter. He'd flatten them out on the sidewalk. It worked. It worked. All right. I hope you learned something. But there's a lot of good YouTubes out there that are doing it. Like I said, the Todd Stock. I think Robbie O'Brien just put one up on sharpening. So find a technique that works for you, because you don't have to spend a lot of money. The Scary Sharp is probably the cheapest system out there that works for the inexperienced. But that does work, because it's awfully hard to screw up a piece of glass. And if there's a glass cutter in your area, the thicker the better.
There's also float glass. Float glass.
Float glass?
It's flatter.
Yeah.
It's floated on mercury.
Yep.
So gravity keeps it Nice and level.
Yeah, that'll work. I mean, I'll tell you something else. Go to a cemetery headstone. Sometimes you can get their offcuts.
Well, go to the granite countertop place with the cutouts
They're-
and sinks,
They're pretty good. They're
particularly not real granite, but like the quartz stuff
yeah,
they
the
sell,
the quartz,
silestone, that kind of thing.
silestone.
There, you can look at it in the reflection. They are dead flat, and you can buy a nice big sheet. It's heavy. It stays there, and it costs a couple of bucks.
Yeah.
They just cut it out of somebody's.
Yeah, they are. I agree with you. They're
I have a
good.
bunch of those around the shop. I use them for all kinds.
Yeah, they come in handy for. You're right. They come in handy for many.
And I have a 1.5 by 1 inch piece, 3 feet long. I use as the straight edge on the router and fence and everything else.
Yeah, they are. They are good.
Very cheap.
What were the materials? It was granite quartz and.
Well, it's the artificial quartzes, I think. They don't have pockets like regular granite. They can silestone.
It's manufactured
Manufactured.
stone. What they do is they grind up real stone and they call it engineered stone because they put it back together and it looks more homogeneous. It
Yeah.
contains natural stone, but it's got a binder in there.
Yeah,
They
it's
make
very,
it out of stone fragments.
and it's not porous,
It's not porous.
so it doesn't have bits and stuff. And any countertop place now, yeah, cheap.
If you save these and make sheep and glue them to them, you can sell them at the craft show. I made my wife a sheep out of that. Oh, she just thinks that's so cool. But yeah, learn to read your chips. You know, when I was a machinist, that was the first thing they told me. Learn to read your chips. And that's true in wood. That is true in wood. So, in a nutshell, the throat is going to control, when you look at your chip, how big of the throat cut is how bad it's going to look. You want the chip to break, not the wood. So when you're looking at your chips, you're looking for that separation a little bit. It'll be a little chattery looking. You want the chatter on the chip, not on the work. And that you can adjust that with the chip breaker and the throat. So that's what these are for. So kind of play with this. My best advice is just take the plane and just start moving stuff around and watch what happens. That's the only way you learn. Just don't, play with it. Take it to the point of crap and just keep adjusting it. But there's something magical about the sound of a plane. That is, I still love that.
I saw a video of the Japanese guys, and that was pretty scary.
Oh,
That was pretty scary.
See the alvarez video, where they do the handmade alvarez, just by using wood
These guys, they had 2 guys,